She got fined 3 times by her own league in 6 weeks, and instead of hiding, she went on a microphone and laughed about it. That single sentence should stop you scrolling right now because nothing about it makes sense on the surface. A professional athlete who keeps breaking the same rule, keeps getting punished for it, and keeps coming back stronger with more fans than before. That is not how discipline is supposed to work anywhere in sports. So either she is the most reckless player in the WNBA, or something much bigger is happening behind the scenes that the league does not want you to notice. Stick around, because by the end of this you will understand why a general manager smiled while delivering bad news, why a coaching staff never once told her to tone it down, and why the very league finding her ended up admitting she was right all along. Most players who get fined once go quiet. They vanish from headlines. They let their agent handle the apology. They disappear into silence until the next game erases the memory. After a second fine, players usually hire someone whose entire job is managing what comes out of their mouth. Sophie Cunningham skipped every single one of those steps. 3 fines landed on her in about 6 weeks, and every single time she picked up her own microphone and talked about it herself, in her own words, on her own podcast, without a publicist softening a single syllable. And here is the part that breaks the usual pattern completely. With every fine that hit her bank account, her fan base did not shrink, it grew louder. That detail alone tells you the story everyone assumes they already know is not the real one. The easy version writes itself because it always does. Player breaks a rule, league punishes her, player learns her lesson, cameras move on to the next storyline. Clean, simple, predictable, and almost entirely wrong when you actually look at what has been happening inside the Indiana Fever organization across 2 full seasons. What is really going on is stranger than that lazy explanation, and honestly it says more about the WNBA as an institution than any single fine ever could on its own. This is the story of a 7-year veteran who decided the price tag attached to speaking honestly was worth paying every single time. A front office that never once told her to soften her voice. And a league that still has not figured out what to do with a player who refuses to play the part where you take the punishment quietly and disappear. To understand why any of this actually matters, you have to rewind to the exact moment that turned Sophie Cunningham from a respected role player into something closer to a symbol for an entire fan base. It was June of 2025, a regular season matchup between the Indiana Fever and the Connecticut Sun, the kind of midweek game that normally gets forgotten within 7 days. During a scramble for a loose ball, Connecticut forward J.C. Sheldon made contact with Caitlin Clark's eye area. It happened fast, it happened in a mess of bodies, and it went completely unaddressed by the officials on the floor. What did not go unaddressed was what happened a few possessions later. Cunningham delivered a hard foul on Sheldon underneath the basket, the kind of foul that requires zero press conference explanation because everybody watching understood exactly what it meant. Both players were ejected from the game. Indiana still won 88-77 and advanced toward the Commissioner's Cup championship. But honestly, the final score almost became secondary to what that single ejection represented to everyone watching at home. In one sequence, without a single word, Cunningham communicated something that no carefully rehearsed post-game soundbite could have ever matched. She watched a teammate absorb contact that officials ignored in real time, and instead of waiting for someone else to handle it, she handled it herself in the most direct language available on a basketball court. That moment built a wall of goodwill with Fever fans that carried straight through the rest of that season and deep into the next one. She was never the most decorated name on that roster. She was never the player the tunnel cameras chased after every game. But she was the one who answered when nobody else did, and fans remember that kind of thing long after the box score gets filed away and forgotten. Here is what actually makes that moment the foundation for everything that followed. It is not just what she did in that game. It is the consistency it revealed about who she actually is underneath the jersey. Because the exact same instinct that pulled her towards Sheldon on that possession, the refusal to watch something happen in silence, is the identical instinct that would go on to cost her $500, then $1,500, then a third undisclosed amount, all within roughly 6 weeks of each other. The first fine landed in July of 2025, and it came from a direction almost nobody expected. Not a heated post-game interview, not a locker room blow-up caught on camera, but a TikTok video. Cunningham posted a clip of herself lip-syncing to a pointed line aimed directly at WNBA officiating. It was sharp, it was fully public, and it cost her $500 almost instantly. Most players at that point quietly delete the clip, draft an apology through their agent, and treat the whole episode as a lesson in social media discipline. Cunningham's response was to bring it up on her own podcast and talk through exactly why she posted it in the first place. That podcast, called Show Me Something, had only just launched, and its very first episode became the trigger for fine number 2. She used that platform to call officiating inconsistent across the league, and she asked, without any diplomatic cushioning at all, what exactly a $500 fine was supposed to accomplish in the first place. The league answered that question by tripling the number. Fine number 2 landed at $1,500, and the message coming out of the league office could not have been more obvious. Escalate the commentary, and the consequence escalates right alongside it. Cunningham's response to that escalated punishment was essentially identical to her response to the first one. She kept talking. Fine number 3 arrived less than 2 weeks after the second one hit. This time the trigger was a specific game involving Dallas Wings rookie Paige Bueckers. Cunningham said publicly that she noticed a real gap in how whistles were being distributed on the floor, that Bueckers appeared to be getting favorable treatment from officials that her own team was not receiving in comparable situations. The league never publicly disclosed the exact dollar amount of that third fine, but Cunningham confirmed it herself on air, laughing that she had officially gone 3 for 3 on league fines in a single season. 3 fines, roughly 6 weeks, and not once did her tone shift toward caution or retreat. If anything, each new fine started functioning less like a punishment and more like confirmation that she was talking about something real enough to warrant a financial response from the people running the league. Here is where this entire story turns genuinely unusual, because the way Sophie Cunningham actually finds out she has been fined is nothing like what you would expect from a normal disciplinary process. The league does not call her directly. There is no official on the other end of a phone reading her a verdict. Instead, the league sends an email straight to the Indiana Fever front office, and the person who ends up walking that news over to her in person is Fever general manager Amber Cox. According to Cunningham's own retelling, shared more than once on her podcast, Cox pulled her aside after the second fine of the season, right in front of the rest of the team, and told her they needed to talk. For one split second, Cunningham admitted she assumed she had messed up in some completely different way, a missed defensive assignment maybe, a technical she had forgotten about, something concrete she could immediately fix. Instead, Cox smiled and told her the league was fining her again. That detail, a general manager smiling while delivering news about a financial penalty, is the small human moment that completely reframes this entire story, because that is simply not how devastating professional news gets delivered. That is how two people talk when they have already had this exact conversation before, when both of them already understand roughly what is coming, and somehow the whole exchange ends up carrying more dark humor than genuine alarm. Cunningham has described Cox's tone in these moments as almost amused, not like a manager confronting a growing problem, not like an executive worried about optics piling up on her roster. It reads closer to a colleague delivering slightly awkward but fully expected news to someone she has clearly already decided to trust rather than manage into submission. Think carefully about what that actually means. A general manager whose entire job includes protecting the organization's relationship with the league office is smiling while telling one of her own players she is about to lose money for the third time in a matter of weeks. That reaction does not happen inside an organization that is quietly hoping a player will settle down and stay quiet. That reaction happens inside an organization that has looked closely at who a player really is, decided that version of her is worth more to the team than a quieter, safer alternative, and simply accepted the fines as the cost of keeping her exactly as she is. What Cunningham actually said on record about officiating was also far more nuanced than the typical player attacks officials framing that usually follow stories like this. In the same conversations where she was criticizing patterns in how games were called, she explicitly acknowledged that officiating is genuinely difficult work. Her complaint was never that officials are lazy or careless. It was narrower and far more specific than that. She was frustrated that one particular pattern of contact, something she watched happen repeatedly and visibly in front of everyone on the court, kept going unaddressed, and that raising it out loud seemed to be treated by the league as a bigger problem than the actual inconsistency itself. That is a meaningfully different argument than a player simply venting after a tough loss. It is a structural critique coming from someone who has spent 7 full seasons studying exactly how games get called at this level, and she was far from the only person inside the league quietly making that same observation, even if she was one of the very few willing to put her own name on it, repeatedly, without ever walking a single word back. Now compare all of this to how these situations typically resolve themselves across professional sports in general. The standard playbook when an athlete draws league discipline is practically scripted at this point. The fine or suspension gets announced. Within 24 to 48 hours, a carefully worded statement appears, usually credited to the player or their representation, expressing deep respect for the league's process and a firm commitment to moving forward with more care. A coach or team executive shows up on camera expressing full confidence that the player has learned something valuable from the experience. If the player themselves gets asked directly, they give an answer engineered to contain zero new information and offend absolutely nobody. The story fades within a week, exactly as designed. None of that happened with Cunningham, not one single beat of it. There was no agent statement walking anything back. There was no coach quoted anywhere urging her to be more measured in future comments. There was no carefully engineered non-answer built to make the story quietly disappear. There was a general manager smiling in a hallway and a player laughing about the whole thing on her own podcast a few days later. That total absence of damage control is itself a loud statement about how the Fever organization genuinely views what Cunningham is doing. Not as a liability that needs managing, not as a problematic pattern that needs correcting before it damages the franchise's image, but as a known, accepted, fully understood part of exactly who she is. Something the front office has clearly chosen to accommodate rather than redirect. Fever head coach Stephanie White has spoken about Cunningham in language that reinforces this reading completely. White describes her as the kind of indispensable utility piece every genuinely competitive roster needs, someone who can slot into multiple roles depending on whatever a given night demands of her. That is not language a coaching staff uses to describe a player they consider a problem. That is language a coaching staff reserves for someone they consider absolutely essential, technical fouls, fines and all. By the time the 2026 season rolled around, Cunningham had a full off-season to sit with 3 fines, a pattern that had pulled national attention her way, and the open question of whether any of it had actually been worth the financial cost. The answer she landed on, based purely on what she did the very first time an opportunity presented itself in the new season, was unmistakably clear. In late June of 2026, on her podcast, she addressed an incident involving Phoenix Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas making contact with Caitlin Clark's throat area during a game. Contact near a player's throat that went completely uncalled in real time. Cunningham said plainly that she believed opponents were specifically targeting Clark, and that officials were not doing nearly enough to protect her from it. Outlets covering the Fever flagged almost instantly that she was risking yet another fine. Same category of complaint, same pattern of raising it publicly instead of letting it quietly sit. A full year had passed since the last round of fines, an entire off-season had come and gone, and her position had not shifted by even a single degree. She was also picking up technical fouls at a pace that suggested this new season was heading straight toward the same destination as the last one. Her third technical of the year, which carries its own automatic $500 fine under league rules, arrived during a separate game against the Mercury in that same stretch. 2 completely separate paths, both leading right back toward the same hallway conversation with Amber Cox, both active again within days of one another. What stands out about all of this is not that Cunningham said something controversial. It is that a full year of reflection led her right back to the identical conclusion she started with. If the fines from the previous season had actually functioned the way disciplinary systems are supposed to function, she would have come back into the new year with at least a little more caution in how she framed public comments about officiating. Instead, she came back and raised the exact same category of concern about the exact same underlying issue, aimed at protecting the exact same teammate, apparently having decided over the entire offseason that her original approach had been completely correct and worth repeating without a single change. There is one more layer to this story that the league office probably wishes had stayed quieter than it has. Shortly before the 2026 season kicked off, the WNBA publicly acknowledged that officiating had needed real improvement following the previous season. It was not a major press conference or a dramatic announcement, but it was genuine and it was on the record. The league entered the new season essentially conceding that the exact problem Cunningham had been fined for describing was in fact a real problem worth fixing. Cunningham caught that acknowledgement immediately and addressed it on her podcast before the new season had even started, saying half-jokingly that the league might owe her a refund on her old fines now that it had admitted the same inconsistency she had already been penalized for naming out loud months earlier. She delivered it with her usual dry humor, but the underlying point behind the joke was not entirely a joke at all. An organization that spent an entire season finding a player for saying officiating was inconsistent and then walked into the very next season publicly agreeing that officiating needed to improve has not exactly proven her wrong after the fact. That is not to say every single call she criticized was handled incorrectly. Reasonable people can and do disagree about individual officiating decisions made in real time under pressure. But the broader argument she was making, that a real pattern existed and was worth talking about publicly regardless of the cost, became considerably harder to dismiss the moment the league itself acknowledged a version of it. Strip away all of the institutional context, and what is left is actually a fairly simple explanation for why Fever fans and Caitlin Clark fans more broadly have claimed Cunningham as one of their own so completely. She has never positioned herself as the most gifted player on that roster. She has never needed to. What she has offered instead is something specific and genuinely rare in modern professional sports, a willingness to say the quiet part loudly, under her own name, on her own platform, at her own financial cost, without ever retreating once the consequences actually arrive. That willingness reads completely differently than ordinary athlete outspokenness precisely because of how consistently it has been tested. 3 fines in a single season would push most players toward at least some recalibration. A full off-season passed, and Cunningham came right back into a new year and raised the same concern the very first time she saw a similar situation play out again. Fans do not need to agree with every single call she has criticized to recognize exactly what that consistency represents. Not a player chasing attention or manufacturing controversy to build a personal brand. A player who genuinely meant what she said the first time, kept meaning it through the second and third fines, and still meant it 12 full months later when the exact same situation presented itself all over again. The image that has followed this entire story, Amber Cox pulling Cunningham aside with a smile, delivering news neither of them particularly enjoys, has become something closer to a symbol of how this organization actually operates than any official press release ever could. It suggests a front office that looked closely at who Cunningham genuinely is, decided that version of her carries more value to the team than a quieter, safer alternative, and has been fully willing to absorb the awkwardness of repeated fines just to keep that version of her fully intact and unedited. There is a version of this story you could tell as a cautionary tale about impulse control and the cost of never knowing when to stop pushing. That version exists, and it is not entirely without some logic behind it. 3 fines in 6 weeks is a meaningful number by any measure. The financial cost is real money out of her own pocket. The distraction risk for a team fighting through a tightening playoff race is real too. But that version misses almost everything that actually makes this dynamic worth paying attention to in the first place. Because the far more accurate version of this story is not about a player who simply cannot control herself. It is about a 7-year veteran who made a deliberate calculation over and over again that saying something true out loud was worth whatever price the league decided to charge her for it. It is about a front office that evaluated that exact calculation and chose not to interfere with it in any way. And it is about a league still working through the uncomfortable question of how consistently it actually wants to enforce its own rules against players who are willing to name its inconsistencies publicly under their own name without flinching. That is not a story with a clean resolution waiting at the end of it. It does not close out with a lesson learned, or a broken system suddenly corrected, or a player who finally decides the cost has become too high to keep paying. It ends exactly where it stands right now, which is mid-sentence, 1 fine at a time, 1 hallway conversation at a time, Exactly the way it has played out since the very first day Cunningham put on a Fever jersey and quietly decided the role she was going to play on this team was never going to be the quiet veteran who lets the noise pass right over her. She chose differently, and she has kept choosing differently every single time the opportunity has come back around. The league keeps sending the bill. She keeps paying it without blinking. And the version of her that shows up behind that podcast microphone has not changed a single word since the version that got pulled aside in a hallway and told the news with a smile on the other person's face. Whether a fourth fine changes any part of that dynamic is honestly the only question still left open here. And based on everything that has played out so far across 2 entire seasons, the answer already seems fairly obvious to anyone paying attention. But drop your take down in the comments because this story is still actively being written in real time, and the very next episode of that podcast could change the number before you even finish watching this video.